In the spring of 1621, on a cluster of islands too small for most maps to name, a Dutch commander gave an order that erased an entire people. When it was finished, a population of around 15,000 had been reduced to fewer than 1,000. They had not rebelled, they had not attacked anyone. Their only crime was geography. They happened to be the one people on Earth who grew a particular seed, a small, brown, wrinkled kernel. Ounce for ounce it was worth more than gold. Sailors died by the thousands carrying it across the oceans, and kings emptied their treasuries to own it. And that same seed is almost certainly sitting in your kitchen right now, in a little glass jar, costing about $2. It is nutmeg, and it hides a second secret. In a large enough dose, nutmeg is a hallucinogen, which is why, centuries after the killing stopped, this ordinary baking spice would be quietly treated like a drug. So how does a cooking spice become worth more than gold, get a civilization destroyed, and end up on the same warning lists as narcotics? I will show you in 3 parts. First, why this one seed became the most valuable thing on the planet, then the monopoly and the massacre that secured it. And finally, the strangest twist of all, how a single nutmeg island was traded away for the city you now call New York. Let us start where every empire starts, with greed. Go back 700 years to the crowded spice markets of medieval Europe. A merchant unrolls a cloth and shows you a handful of small brown seeds, and he tells you they will protect you from the plague. People believed him. During the Black Death, physicians across Europe insisted that nutmeg could keep the disease away. The wealthy wore it in little perforated lockets around their necks, breathing it in like a shield against death. It did nothing, of course, but belief moves markets, and demand for nutmeg went vertical. Here was the problem. Nobody in Europe knew where it came from. The seeds passed through a long chain of hands, from Arab traders to the merchants of Venice, and every link in that chain guarded the secret and took its cut. By the time a sack of nutmeg reached a market in London or Amsterdam, it had crossed half the planet, and its price had multiplied beyond reason. By some accounts, the markup from the source to a European table reached 60,000%. A small bag of these seeds could buy a house. A larger one could buy a ship. So picture what that meant to the ambitious men of Europe. Somewhere out there was an island that grew money on trees, and whoever found it first and held it would control one of the richest trades in human history. The hunt for the source of nutmeg became one of the great obsessions of the age of exploration. And when the Europeans finally found it, they discovered that the entire world's supply grew on a few specks of volcanic rock in the eastern seas, an archipelago called the Banda Islands. Which brings us to part 2, and to the company that decided it would own all of it. The Portuguese reached the Banda Islands first in the early 1500s. But they were traders, not occupiers. The Dutch had a different idea. In 1602, the Netherlands created the Dutch East India Company, known by its initials, the VOC. It was the first multinational corporation in history, the first company to sell shares of itself to the public, and for a time the most valuable enterprise the world had ever seen. It had its own armies, its own warships, and the legal power to wage war. And it wanted one thing above all others, a total unbreakable monopoly on nutmeg. There was only one obstacle, the Bandanese themselves. They were a nation of independent traders who had sold their nutmeg to anyone who sailed in for centuries, to Arabs, to Chinese, to the English. The VOC demanded they sign contracts promising to sell to the Dutch and no one else. The Bandanese signed some of these and then kept trading freely, partly because the contracts made little sense in their world. To the company, that was a betrayal. In 1621, the Dutch East India Company sent a commander to end the problem permanently. He arrived with a fleet, a force of soldiers, and a contingent of Japanese mercenaries. What followed was not a battle. It was a clearing. The islands were blockaded, and the people were starved, hunted, and broken. The council of elders who led the Bandanese were executed. The rest were killed, deported to other Dutch colonies, or sold into slavery. A people of roughly 15,000 was reduced to fewer than 1,000 in a matter of months. An entire civilization gone so that the price of a baking spice could be controlled. Then the company did something coldly logical. It carved the emptied islands into plantations, handed them to Dutch planters, and worked them with enslaved laborers shipped in from elsewhere. To keep prices impossibly high, the Dutch East India Company limited nutmeg to just 2 islands it could guard and ordered every other tree destroyed. It soaked the seeds in lime so they could not sprout if anyone smuggled them out. And in Amsterdam, when the warehouses grew too full, the company burned mountains of nutmeg in public, deliberately torching a fortune to keep the world hungry for more. For nearly 150 years it worked. But one island had slipped through their fingers, and that single island would reshape the map of the world. That is part 3. The island was called Run, which I will pronounce Roon, so it is not mistaken for the ordinary word. It was the smallest of the Banda Islands, barely 2 miles long, and the English had reached it first. An English merchant named Nathaniel Courthope held run against the Dutch for years, refusing every demand to leave, until he was finally killed for it. For decades, this scrap of land was a thorn in the side of the Dutch monopoly, and a bitter dispute between 2 empires. In 1667, the 2 sides sat down to end a war in a treaty signed at Breda. As part of the deal, the English finally surrendered their claim to the island of Run. And in exchange, the Dutch surrendered their claim to a small, muddy trading post on the other side of the world that the English had recently seized. That trading post was called New Amsterdam. The English kept it and renamed it after the Duke of York. They called it New York. Sit with that for a moment. The English handed over a nutmeg island and walked away with Manhattan. At the time, almost everyone believed the Dutch had won the trade. Nutmeg was a fortune. Manhattan was a swamp. The monopoly did not last forever. In the 1700s, a Frenchman named Pierre Poivre smuggled nutmeg seedlings out of the islands and planted them far away. Later, the British seized the Bandas during their wars with the Dutch and carried the trees to their own colonies, including a Caribbean island called Grenada, which still wears a nutmeg on its national flag to this day. The price collapsed. The thing men had killed thousands to control became, in the end, ordinary. Which leaves the final mystery, the one in the title: why a spice ended up treated like a drug. Nutmeg contains a compound called Myristicin, which is pronounced Myristicin. In small amounts, it is harmless and delicious. In large amounts, it is something else entirely, a deliriant that can bring on hallucinations, a racing heart, and days of sickness. For centuries, people who could not afford real intoxicants discovered they could get high on it. It was used quietly in prisons, including by a young Malcolm X, who wrote about swallowing nutmeg behind bars to dull the time. Today, poison control centers still take calls about it every year, and it sits in a strange place, a legal spice that authorities openly warn people not to misuse, a thing you bake with that has also been treated like contraband. So the next time you open that little jar, remember what you are holding. A seed that was once worth more than gold. A seed that emptied islands and bought a city. A seed that built the first great corporation and then outlived its empire, only to end up costing about $2 on a supermarket shelf. History is full of these. The smallest things with the bloodiest stories. If you want more of them, stay with me. There are a lot of jars in that cupboard.